January 28, 1547. The King of England, a man once the epitome of physical vitality and imposing masculinity, lay rotting in his bedchamber, his swollen form a grotesque parody of the vigorous monarch he had once been. The air, thick with the cloying scent of suppurating flesh, stale urine, and desperate attempts to mask the omnipresent stench, clung to the rich tapestries and polished floors of the palace at Whitehall. He was no longer the Golden Prince, the athletic young man who could ride, hunt, and dance with effortless grace. He was a monument to corporeal decay, a man whose ambition had outstripped his own biology, leaving behind only the agonizing husk of what was once Henry VIII. The sheer weight of his diseased body, unable to move without the aid of intricate machinery and multiple attendants, spoke volumes of a life consumed by unchecked power and the devastating consequences of its absolute exercise. To witness him in his final hours was to confront the ultimate vulnerability of even the most formidable tyrant, a stark, almost theatrical display of human frailty. But this was no ordinary demise. It was the slow, agonizing dissolution of a man who had reshaped a nation and terrorized his own people, now reduced to a spectacle of torment. To understand why this man, once celebrated as the most handsome prince in Christendom, met such a gruesome end, one must look beyond the immediate scene of his decay and consider the insidious origins of his physical and mental collapse. The genesis of his torment can be traced back decades, to a seemingly innocuous jousting accident in 1536, a fall that reignited a long-standing leg ulcer. This chronic wound, a festering gateway for infection, would become the relentless architect of his suffering, transforming a monarch renowned for his physical prowess into an incapacitated, perpetually inflamed figure. The pain was constant, a gnawing presence that seeped into his very bones, eroding his legendary temper and sharpening the edges of his paranoia. What began as a physical affliction subtly morphed into a psychological malady, casting a shadow over his court and infusing his later reign with a chilling, unpredictable brutality. The king, once robust, was now trapped within a prison of his own flesh, a stark illustration of the fragility of power when confronted with the inexorable march of biological decay. His physical decline paralleled, and perhaps even exacerbated, the intensification of his reign of terror. As Henry's body withered and his pain mounted, so too did his grip on power become increasingly ruthless and capricious. The dissolution of the monasteries, enacted years prior, was not merely a theological reform, but a vast accumulation of wealth and a brutal consolidation of royal authority, leaving thousands dispossessed and countless historical treasures destroyed. The purges that followed, the swift and often unjust executions of those perceived as threats, friends, advisors, even family, created an atmosphere of pervasive fear that permeated every corner of his kingdom. Courtiers spoke in whispers, fearing that an ill-judged word or a fleeting glance could lead to the scaffold. This systemic cruelty, a deliberate policy of suppression enforced by the terrifying power of the state, became the defining characteristic of his later years. The king's physical torment, a constant and unbearable reality, seemed to find its outward expression in the torment he inflicted upon his subjects, blurring the lines between personal agony and public tyranny. The tragic narrative of his many wives stands as a testament to the devastating consequences of his unchecked will and the profound emotional scars he inflicted upon those closest to him. The fates of Catherine of Aragon, divorced and cast aside, and Anne Boleyn, executed on trumped-up charges of treason and incest, serve as chilling examples of women sacrificed on the altar of his desire for a male heir and his insatiable quest for absolute control. Their stories, often overshadowed by the larger historical narrative of Henry's reign, highlight the brutal transactional nature of his relationships, reducing queens to instruments of political expediency and their lives to disposable commodities. The subsequent execution of Catherine Howard, his fifth wife, for alleged infidelity, further underscored the terrifying peril of being bound to a monarch whose word was law and whose suspicion was a death sentence. Her life, much like so many others who crossed his path, had never truly been her own, but rather a fleeting moment in the king's grand, self-serving drama, ending in ultimate, chilling brutality. His monstrous actions, born of both personal insecurity and the corrosive influence of absolute power, led inevitably to a profound and haunting isolation. The court, once a vibrant hub of intellectual and cultural exchange, became a place of whispered anxieties and sycophantic deference. True companionship withered, replaced by a retinue of terrified attendants and obsequious advisors who dared not challenge his increasingly erratic pronouncements. The king, burdened by his own making, became estranged not only from his subjects but also from the very fabric of human connection. The psychological trauma he inflicted upon himself, a slow-burning self-immolation of empathy and trust, was as profound as the physical torment that ravaged his body. He was surrounded by opulence, yet utterly alone, a man haunted by the specters of his past decisions and the profound absence of genuine affection. The very power he so desperately craved and ruthlessly wielded ultimately became the architect of his own profound and agonizing loneliness, leaving him to face his final days in a gilded cage of his own design. The physical torment of Henry VIII escalated with each passing year, painting a vivid picture of a body in rebellion against its occupant. By the end of his reign, he suffered from crippling gout, chronic headaches, and, most prominently, the perpetually suppurating leg ulcer that oozed and reeked, making his presence unbearable to all but the most devoted and well-paid servants. His colossal weight, estimated to be close to 400 pounds, rendered him immobile without mechanical assistance, often requiring a complex system of pulleys and levers to move him from room to room. The slightest movement brought excruciating pain, exacerbating his already volatile temper and fueling a desperate reliance on opiates and alcohol, which only dulled his senses without truly alleviating his suffering. The constant inflammation, a relentless assault on his constitution, contributed to a host of other ailments, including breathlessness and chronic digestive issues. This was not merely discomfort, it was a profound and unceasing torment, a bodily betrayal that mirrored the betrayals he had inflicted upon his kingdom, reducing the once dominant figure to a fragile, groaning hulk. In his final months, the palace at Whitehall transformed into a monument to his misery, an opulent prison where the stench of disease perpetually mingled with the perfume of wealth. The royal bedchamber, once a vibrant center of political intrigue and domesticity, became a chamber of horrors, a testament to the ravages of uncontrolled illness and unchecked power. Attendants moved with hushed reverence and thinly veiled revulsion, accustomed to the sight of the king's swollen limbs and the constant application of poultices to his festering leg. Even the finest silks and richest foods could not disguise the abject suffering of the monarch. Sleep offered little respite, often interrupted by spasms of pain or terrifying nightmares that were as much a product of his physical decay as his psychological trauma. The public, though largely shielded from the grotesque details, understood through rumor and court whispers that their king was dying, slowly and agonizingly. This period was marked by a quiet, pervasive despair, as the once feared figure was reduced to a pitiful, helpless invalid, whose every breath was a struggle, and whose very existence was a haunting reminder of the fragility of even the most fearsome reign. The lingering death of Henry VIII was an event shrouded in a profound and chilling silence, a quiet terror that permeated the court. No one dared utter the words that hung heavy in the air, that the king was dying. The Treason Act, a monstrous creation of his own making, dictated that even predicting the king's death was an act of treason. This legal framework, designed to protect his absolute authority, now trapped his closest advisors in a terrifying dilemma, leaving them paralyzed by fear as their sovereign slipped away. Physician after physician was called, offering desperate remedies that proved futile against the relentless tide of his ailments. On the evening of January 27, 1547, the king's breath grew shallow, and his final confession was heard by Archbishop Thomas Cranmer, who, with courage born of desperation, finally told the dying king to prepare for his end. The ensuing quiet of the death chamber, broken only by the king's labored gasps, was not one of reverence but of sheer, agonizing anticipation, a moment suspended between the terrifying present and an uncertain, yet inevitable, future for the realm. The immediate aftermath of Henry VIII's death provided a final, almost biblical humiliation. a grim piece of historical irony that spoke volumes about his legacy. Due to the oppressive weight of the Treason Act, his death was kept secret for several days. A coffin containing his gargantuan, decaying body was moved from Whitehall to Windsor. During its overnight stop at Sion Abbey, a former monastic house he had dissolved, the coffin, unsecured or perhaps poorly constructed, burst open. The putrefied remains of the king, fluids and gases, spilled out onto the floor. Legend, or perhaps chilling historical truth, has it that a pack of dogs, attracted by the stench, licked up the royal fluids, fulfilling a prophecy made years earlier by a Franciscan friar whom Henry had persecuted. This grotesque spectacle, though perhaps apocryphal in its precise details, serves as a powerful moral inversion. The man who had been the embodiment of absolute power, the ultimate symbol of control and authority, was, in death, utterly powerless over his own decaying flesh. It was not justice, it was a warning, a stark, devastating testament to the ultimate indignity that awaits even the most tyrannical figures. The legacy of Henry VIII is one that continues to provoke profound reflection, a haunting tapestry woven from ambition, cruelty, and the indelible marks left on England's religious, political, and social fabric. We must remember that his reign was not merely a series of historical events, but a period of profound human suffering, shaped by the will of a man whose personal insecurities metastasized into national policy, and whose fear became the engine of a brutal state. His decline, both physical and moral, serves as a sobering insight into the corrupting nature of unbridled authority. The ultimate resolution of his story lies not in narrative closure, for the consequences of his actions reverberated for centuries, but in the enduring questions his life provokes. How does one balance power with humanity? And what price do societies pay when they grant absolute control to fallible individuals? The terrifying humiliation of his final days, the gruesome decomposition that followed, stands as a hauntingly reverent commentary, a stark reminder that even the most formidable empires and the most terrifying monarchs cannot escape the common fate of all flesh, nor the enduring judgment of history.